You talk about that when it comes to longevity, genetics has less to do with how long you will live versus your capacity for joy.
It is easy and common to look at someone who's thriving in longevity and say, wow, what great genes that person has. But the reality is that the research shows this, that genetics predicts about somewhere between 13 and 25% of our aging experience, which means the rest is up to us. A long life, even a long life in good physical health, doesn't mean much if you don't love your life.
The Money Talk Podcast, brought to you by TD Wealth with Kim Parlee.
You have to be living under a rock to not notice that the latest pursuit for many is the eternal fountain of youth. How to live longer, and then how to be healthier. But our next guest, who is a gerontologist and New York Times bestselling author, says it's not just about lifespan, and it's not just about healthspan. She has coined the phrase Joyspan and says your capacity for joy, not your genetics, is what will dictate how long you live and how well you live. Dr. Kerry Burnight is a gerontologist and the author of the new book, Joyspan, The Art and Science of Thriving in Life's Second Half, and she joins us now. Kerry, thanks so much for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here.
I have to say, I spend a lot of time talking to a lot of very financially driven people, a lot of data-driven people. And so I was going through the book, which is very highlighted, I might add. There was a piece here where you talk about that when it comes to longevity, genetics has less to do with how long you will live versus your capacity for joy. My words, not yours. But can we start there, please? Can you explain that?
Yes, it is easy and common to look at someone who's thriving in longevity and say, wow, what great genes that person has. But the reality is that the research shows this, that genetics predicts about somewhere between 13 and 25% of our aging experience, which means the rest is up to us. These hundreds of thousands of daily choices that we're making is what shapes our experience in longevity.
Tell me what Joyspan is.
So using lifespan, how long you live, healthspan, how long you enjoy good health, I chose the word Joyspan because it captures joy, but we need to define joy because that too is often misunderstood. What joy is not is toxic positivity or even ecstasy. Joy is defined by the American Psychological Association as well-being, satisfaction. So it's more akin to contentment than it is to ecstasy. And there's even a difference between joy and happiness. So happiness is often up and down and often dependent on our circumstances. And joy, because it's more of an inside job, is great when we talk about longevity because getting older isn't easy, and yet the science shows us that we can maintain joy even in very challenging situations.
Can you explain, you said joy is an inside job. What do you mean by inside job?
Yes. So joy, we have found, is something that can be cultivated. So in the same way, an analogy I like to use is our physical health is very important, and our physical strength is made up of components that we work on every day, hopefully, and that is things like cardiovascular health, strength training, agility training, and flexibility. So we know that as young as we can, we want to start on fortifying our physical strength. But the new findings, and in fact, it's not that they're new, it's just that it's new that we're studying it and talking about it and now implementing it. But this internal strength is also made up of 4 components. And we'll get into them later, but what these components are things like continuing to grow, prioritizing human connection, making sure that we have the resources internally and externally to adapt to changing circumstances, and prioritizing giving, finding purpose and giving of ourselves.
I think what I really loved about the book is, you mentioned it's not toxic positivity to say, I'm fine, even if you're not fine. Fine is always, I think, the code word for when you're not fine. But anyway.
Yes.
And when we'll get more into this, but it's a practice and there's a discipline almost that you need to have when you're thinking about this. And I should let you know as well, I listen sometimes to other podcasts. I was listening to other podcasts with you, and you were trying to come up with an acronym for the connect and grow. And I think I came up with can grow adaptive. That's my word. That's how I remember your four words all strung together. So there you go. That's how I remember it.
Tell me more about it. No, because what is it?
Can grow adaptive. That's your words kind of all strung together. So that way I'm like, when I'm thinking about things, that's how I think about it now. So it had an impact. I've been thinking about it for a while.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's go back, because I think, part of the power of this is when you give the examples in the book, and you've got two grandmothers, you use them as a great analogy of one who does and one who doesn't. So maybe tell us about them.
Yes. So I was lucky enough to have two grandmothers, and I know not everyone does, but when I was young, I got to know them. And what I found was that there was one whose name we called Gram Etta, and everything was conceived and framed and articulated as aging is decline. And she told me early on, like, Kerry, don't grow old. I used to be something and I'm not anything anymore. And then she would really focus on the physical changes and how awful it was. And I just really, even as a young person, I felt so eager to end our visits because it was rough to be around her and her suffering. And I was sorry and heartbroken for her suffering. And yet I had a grandmother on the other side of my family, and she had the same socioeconomic status. She had even the same health conditions. She was roughly the same age. Both grandmothers were widows. And yet somehow, her name was Charlotte. Charlotte was continuing to be interested in the world. And although she too had hard things and pain, it was never what she focused upon. And I couldn't wait to get to her house. I never wanted to leave. I had all of these sleepovers, and she profoundly impacted my life. And so as I grew older, I thought, what was that difference between these two grandmothers, who one lived with so much suffering and the other one who really, up until her last breath practically, was connected, engaged, vital, relevant, and enjoying life?
It's hard to do, though. And we're going to get into the matrix and the word that I put together, but it's hard because if you're not in a good space, to turn to make that change, to try and be more joyful without the toxic positivity, it's tricky.
Absolutely. And it's because life is hard and growing older is hard. It's all the more reason that we want to put the effort in order to give ourselves the resources. So again, with that physical analogy, you don't look at someone and just think, oh, they're just so lucky that they can lift heavy weights or that they can run. You know that every day they're putting in the effort and the seemingly small steps forward. And the same is true with research-based practices that give you the tools you need to do something hard. And that hard thing is walking through life and taking in stride the challenge and seeing the good. And it isn't, people want to say, well, easy for you to say, you don't have this going on, you don't have that going on, you don't have my background of, hardship and trauma. And it is true that we all start at a different baseline, But it is also true that we can incrementally improve the quality of our own lives, that is our emotional well-being, with these practices and with this mindset shift to make your life better. Because that's the goal. I spent the first 16 years of my career as a gerontologist with all-day suffering, with people who had endured so much as a result of vulnerability. And it was largely in the domain of elder abuse, financial exploitation, neglect, and self-neglect. I ran the nation's first elder abuse forensic center. And it was by seeing these people suffer so profoundly for years that I thought there's got to be a way that if we could get to these people earlier, that we could give them what is necessary to avoid ending up like this. And that's why I feel like it's incumbent upon us to change the narrative around aging in order to fortify ourselves and our loved ones in order to minimize suffering.
It's, that experience is going to do one of two things, right? Like, I mean, you're taking, I think, what you've learned and bring it for the positive. A lot of people would not. I mean, that's a very hard thing to witness and see what you've seen. When you talk about this then, and actually this is, I think, applicable not just to people in the second half of their life, it's applicable to everybody. But if you want to practice joy, and you consider it a practice, again, let's go to your matrix, the grow, connect, adapt, and give. How do you define grow? What does it mean from your perspective?
Okay, so to grow, and I love that you're saying that this is something that is for people who are aging, and that simply means people who are alive. So these practices will help when you're aging in your 20s and all the way up to your 100s. And the earlier you start, the better, but it's never too late to get started. So the first of these 4 elements of the Joyspan matrix is grow. And the definition of grow is to continue to push yourself outside the box of comfort and to do hard things that are of interest. Because you think about when we were children, every day practically, we were expected to, okay, now you're going to learn times tables. That was new. All right, now you're going to jump off a diving board. Okay, now get behind the wheel of a car when you're 15 and try to learn to drive. Like, we were always having that next thing. And that is good for humans. It's good for your brain. And it's also good for that self-confidence and that self-worth and that challenge and stimulating your intellectual curiosity. Like, what am I interested in? What is one small thing that I could dig into a little bit, whether it is getting more into politics or fishing or music or art or a lot of these volunteer opportunities that the world so desperately needs. So rather than taking our foot off the pedal of life, it's to continue, and maybe in retirement, you're going to push yourself a little to find, what am I interested in? Because frankly, the world needs what older versions of ourselves have to offer.
I'm going to play, I'm not generally a negative person, but I'm going to try and play devil's advocate here. And because I think this is the conversation. Okay. So I'm older. Let's say that I spent my life, going on adventures and hiking around the world, and I can't hike anymore. And the way that I want to grow is I want to keep hiking. What do you say to that person?
Yes. So we have to find that we are more than the narrow thing that we have defined ourselves with. And so I had this, and I love this example. So I was not a great hiker, but what I'm going to say is I was pretty good with the computer. I was a university professor. I was, my eyes, as it turned out, were a big part of how I got through the world and how I was sort of good at navigating the world. And in my 50s, I had a retinal detachment that left me entirely blind in one eye and with impaired vision in the other eye. And it was, with all these surgeries, I couldn't drive. I couldn't use my phone or my computer. And when I was in social settings, it was hard to read people's faces. And I did have this big crisis. And the first thing I did wasn't to step up and grow. The first thing I did was I felt awful for myself. I didn't feel like myself. I complained and shook my fist, which got me nowhere except on the couch, and I was eating a whole bunch and lamenting this change. But what I realized is I really had to make this choice to say, okay, these things that had been what I was good at and what I liked, your example, hiking, my example, using my computer, I can't do that right now, maybe ever. I've got to be able to grow into finding other parts to myself that I can nurture. And when we do that and we take a step back, we recognize we become so identified with roles and what we're good at and what we like that we forget that we are really 3D creatures, and we can, with thought, find other areas to start to pursue, to be willing to be not good at something in the beginning, and being not good at something is quite good for you, right?
Yeah.
So when I had to go, okay, I'm going to use all this voice technology and I am horrible at it. But over time I did get better, and then I grew, and then lucky me, which is not always the case, but I did get my vision back and I could go back to my old ways, but then I also had these new ways about me too. For example, I was really able to become a better listener, because without my vision, it was my ears that were my asset. And I now wouldn't have traded that experience, because I realized that listening is hopefully with me for the journey.
That's I'm not going to say fantastic, but it is. It's nice to hear the journey of what you went through and how you get there. And it's hard. I just want to say, for people who are listening, it's hard. Even when you recognize what you have to do, it's tricky. Your second one is connect. Really important for joy. And again, I wrote down a couple notes that you had. And I thought this was fascinating too. It's wanting, if you want more interaction than you have, maybe you have a lot and want more, or maybe you have very little and just want a bit more, but not having what you want, I think you have in here was the equivalent of smoking 14 cigarettes a day. That was in there, which is astounding.
Yeah, so what that research literature is from the loneliness literature.
Yeah.
It's been studied quite extensively. And that definition of loneliness is wanting more social interaction than you currently have. So what that means is people can be married and be lonely, or in a group and be lonely, or people can be with few people and not feel lonely. So the step one is to ask yourself, do I wish or want more social interaction than I currently have? And to just be really honest, because everybody is lonely sometimes. And it is nothing to do with shame. I mean, humans, that is the case, that there are times where we all feel lonely. And once you identified that, like, yes, I would like some more social interaction, or maybe some different social interaction, then thinking about what that might look like. And so one thing I encourage patients to do is to take an inventory. I think the same way that you would take your financial inventory. Okay, where is my money invested, and do I have enough of it to last me the long haul? The same thing can be true with our social portfolio. So we're looking to say, do I have a few, maybe up to 5, maybe one, close friends who I could call in the middle of the night, or call for no reason, or call with something that's going on in my life? And I think of it as these Dunbar circles, which are just concentric circles like a bullseye. So you have your closest group, and there'll be just a few people in that group. And then going out from there, there'd be maybe 10 people in that next level. And I even encourage people, write them out. Because sometimes when you're trying to think like, I do have maybe 10 people I'd sort of call friends, but gosh, there's really nobody in the inner group. And then we think about how to move from the I sort of know this person to the inner group. And the way that you do that is by being proactive. Mm-hmm. So that means that rather than being the person who waits to have somebody invite them somewhere or somebody call them or somebody include them. It takes the work for you to be that person. I call that like be that friend, the one who makes the plans. And in doing this, what you're doing is diversifying your social portfolio, to go back to our financial analogy. So my mom is 96, and she has outlived probably 99% of her friends. So luckily, we knew this research early on. And so about 20 years ago, when I talked to her about diversifying her social portfolio, she did. And she created friendships with people who were 10 to 20 years younger than she was. And now those are her close friends because she has outlived her friends. And the one impediment is that sometimes, because there's a great ageist, so this feeling that we are somehow less than because we're older, which in fact is not true, but is perpetuated by this multi-billion-dollar anti-aging industry. But if we buy into that, then we might think, oh, well, a younger person wouldn't want to be with me as an older person. But again, what the research shows is that intergenerational friendships benefit both sides so much, with the younger people benefiting even more. So last week, my mom went to this fun social group that she created, and she's 96, and the other women in the group are in their 70s. And to hear all of them laugh and enjoy themselves, it really gives a model for the rest of us of how to proactively curate a social portfolio.
I think the challenge with this is you have an example in the book and a couple things. I was just going to make a joke about, I don't know if my 15-year-old wants to hang out with me that much right now, Kerry, but he actually does. I joke about it, but I actually think he likes it sometimes, so it is good. So, but you give this great example of this woman, Jill, and I think she and her and her husband married in their 20s and kids, but then of course he passed away. The kids weren't around, emotional isolation. And there was this one sentence that it stood out to me, where it said she resisted joining community activities because that seemed desperate. And I think that's the burden, or that's the barrier people have to get over.
I absolutely, and I hear it all the time. And it's, again, going back to the physical part, sometimes when you're lifting weights, it is really uncomfortable. It is really inconvenient. And you think, I hate that I need to do that. And yet you know that you need to in order to enjoy a 100-year life. And the same is true about getting out of your comfort zone, maybe needing to kiss a few frogs, right? Like maybe you reach out to some people and they don't reciprocate interest in being friends with you, but persisting anyway. And then when you do, it is so worthwhile, because it's two people who are addressing their loneliness situation. And you can start really small, right? Like going into your phone today and pulling up the name of somebody that you like, but that maybe you've lost touch with, and simply saying, hey, Joe, I was thinking about you today. And, give that a go. It takes a minute, and maybe he's going to reply. And if he does, terrific, take it from there. And if he doesn't, do it again tomorrow. And meeting new people, it can get to be almost like a game. So, for example, when I'm out, I really do ask the name of the person who is serving coffee at Starbucks. And then the next time I come, I can say, hi, Laura. And then over time, you get to a conversation. And then I might even say, hey, Laura, after your shift, do you want to grab a cup of coffee? If I felt like we were making a connection. But what the heck? Put yourself out there. And like you said, the literature shows that social connection, those who are connected versus those who are not connected to other humans, live longer. than those who don't. So if this was a medication, we would all be clamoring for it. And yet it's something as simple yet complex as being the person who is proactively making friendships.
How does this work with introverts? I have to ask, just because I come from a long line of introverts as well too. So is it the difference between, maybe I'm alone, but I don't feel lonely versus the feeling of lonely?
Okay, I love that question too, because I am married to an introvert. And
we're good people.
So,
we're good people.
Yes. and I love them. So everybody's kind of ideal social interaction is different. Like some people think, oh, wouldn't it just be marvelous to be at a great big party where we were all dancing and high-fiving? And other people go, yeah, that's my idea of hell. So for people who like it a little more low-key and a little bit smaller groups, good. Proactively cultivate that. But introverts, you don't have a get out of jail free card because you too still need that human connection. And so it might be something like someone that you enjoy one-on-one, and maybe you learn that they're needing to go to chemotherapy. And maybe you then offer, hey, Jill, could I drive you to chemotherapy and give your spouse the day off? And then just in that quiet driving and just being there for that person, it's so meaningful because all of us are going to need a friend in this long journey, and the kind of friend that we can call upon for some assistance. And it's not just like quid pro quo, I'm doing this for you, you do it for me. But it's humans meaningfully connecting with one another in a way that suits them, whether they're introverts or extroverts.
You are dipping a bit into some of the other categories, but that's okay. You wrote the book. You're allowed to do that. That was the give piece. We're talking about the importance to be able to give. But let's talk about adapt and give. And tell me more about adapt, because that's a hard one. And it's hard as you get older. It's hard.
Yes. So the one thing that we know for sure is that there will be change in these long lives. So as a university professor, I start out with my undergraduate students and I say, let's talk about mortality rate. And then I put up a pie chart behind me, a big red circle where it's 100% filled in. I'm like, this is the mortality rate. 100% of humans will die. And that is not morbid, and it is not defeatist. It is a reality. And generally, before we die, there's going to be chronic conditions or acute conditions. Either we will die before our spouse, or our spouse will die before we do, if we're in a relationship. And so because of this, it is, rather than just say, I'm not going to think about aging. I'm not going to think about it. Really think about, because also the alternative of, someone recently said, oh, I just think I'm going to live forever. And I said, I don't think you've thought that through, what it would look like if we all lived forever. I mean, it would not be sustainable, and it would not be pleasant. So the fact that we're going to die and that we're going to have physical changes and we're going to have social changes is why that cultivating the ability to know in advance that you're going to be able to adapt to what comes your way because you're going to put the effort in. And the literature that it ties to is the coping literature, how a person copes, and also the resilience literature. So there are internal ways to bolster yourself in your ability to adapt to life's changes and challenges, and there are external ways. And so the external ways, for example, would be to go to counseling and to go, this is hard. I have walked with my spouse for 60 years, and now he has passed away, and I don't know how to do this part by myself. And you go get some counseling, or to go to other widows and sit together. And if there's not a group, to start a group and say, hey, come on over and let's talk about this weird new phase where we don't have our spouses. And the internal things that we can cultivate is, for example, taking some time to journal and to think about, okay, these are things that I'm really grappling with. And if I open my eyes in the morning and think through, wow, I'm going through a late life divorce. I didn't see that coming. I was just recently diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I didn't see that coming. And if you're thinking about that all day, it consumes you. And that's why the ability, for example, with a journal to, in addition to being cognizant of the challenges you're going through, to also be able to go through and the things that are right in this world, because there's always more that's right than is wrong. And attuning ourselves to that makes a difference.
What about give? How important is that? You talk about in the book, and we'll talk about ageism in a second too, but one of the great gifts of getting older is we hope we get wiser. And you talk about really being able to give that wisdom to others and help in all sorts of different ways.
Yes. So there is the potential for growing in wisdom, but it is not inevitable. That too takes work. So I work with thousands and thousands of older people. Some are wise, some are not. And in order to get to wisdom and generativity, there is profound evidence on people who give, who find ways to give of themselves. So the way that people a lot think about legacy is think about giving their money. That is one way, but most of us, we don't have a lot of money that we're going to be able to give. And so we're thinking about giving of ourselves. And giving is tied to the purpose literature. And what a study at UCLA found is that people who feel like they have a purpose, a way to give of themselves, have a different epigenetic expression of their genes. So that meant that they had lower inflammation and greater antiviral loads. So physiologically, giving makes a difference, and feeling like you have a purpose makes a difference. And it's not big, huge things, it's small things. For example, you happen to see in your backyard, you have lemons. You pick those lemons, put them in a bag, go next door to your neighbor. I've got some lemons. It's a tiny, tiny, no big deal thing, but it's something that you're doing, and it can help with social connection. And you might find that person is standing there with two babies on their hips trying to cook dinner. And maybe from there, it would be like, do you want me to entertain the kids while you cook dinner? Because I know you're a working single mother. If that would be helpful, I'm available. That little give can be life-changing, not just for the person that you're helping, but for you as well.
I'm always astounded when because it feels good. It feels great to have community around you, these things. But when you tell me there's epigenetic evidence that these things, they change your physiology, which changes, if it's epigenetic, you're changing your children's physiology one day, someday too, as well. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Yes, the beginning of my career, I researched things that, dementia, depression, psychoses, a lot of things that seemingly had greater gravitas as a researcher. And yet, when I have moved over to a more preventive, and I'm studying things like generosity and kindness, it somehow seems less important, less meaty, less academic, less real, but it isn't.
Can I ask you about ageism, and specifically internalized ageism as you talk about it? And again, I keep going back to these little data points I've picked, but you quote a group at Yale University who've said that those with positive beliefs about aging live 7.5 years longer. What is a positive belief about aging? What does that entail versus a negative one?
Okay, so the one mindset that's kind of default, sadly, these days is this decline aging mindset, that everything gets worse. But the reality is that that is not true. When we look at the literature and the lived experience of older adults, What gets better as you get older? One, not caring as much about what other people think, which is quite liberating, and I'm enjoying it at 56, and I'm looking forward to it even more at 96. We have greater ability to regulate our emotions so that we haven't such huge ups and huge downs. It's a little more of a contentment. We have a greater appreciation of connection, often of music, art, and the depth of our spirituality. We also have the potential for improved problem solving, and this too is not talked about enough. That is the neurological integration of our left and right hemisphere of our brain and drawing upon all this lifetime of solving problems. And yet, if we buy into this thing that aging is less than, then we're not empowered to offer these solutions that work and that the world needs. So next time you find yourself having an ageist thought like, oh, I'm old, or I shouldn't weigh in on this because, all these 20-year-olds and here I am in my 70s, contradict yourself and replace that with, they need me to step in and give some of this experience-based problem solving and perspective.
It's funny, too, because if you think about this in another metaphor, it makes so much sense. I mean, you think about sports teams, right? Like, you need rookies, you need people who are young and energetic, but you really value the wisdom of the people who've been on the team longer, who understand things work, and it's putting it all together that works well.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes, I was speaking with a business group yesterday, and they had a flood, and all the 20-year-olds were doing some really interesting things to try to, with tech, to get things figured out. And the woman who worked there, who was 68, went and turned off the water main so that the water stopped. And I was like, thank heaven for you. You know, that was not tech skills related.
What about, can I ask you, just, how has the book been received? What's been surprising to you? Has it spurred conversations you didn't expect?
It really, the New York Times ran a piece about it, and it's been internationally conversation provoking. And that's what we should be doing, which is really talking about the fact that a long life, even a long life in good physical health, doesn't mean much if you don't love your life. And that we are not just victims to growing older. We can, in fact, exert a certain degree of control in how we face the challenges that we have. And I've been hearing from people all over the place saying, gosh, this little mindset shift is actually, I thought that it was too late for me to learn guitar, but now that I'm really thinking it through and understanding what the research says about how good it would be for me to step outside my comfort zone, and I'm learning guitar, and then therefore I have met new friends, and I'm teaching my grandson. So it's been really encouraging. And as a gerontologist for so long, we weren't talking about aging. And the fact that people now want to talk about it is my dream.
It's interesting too, and one of the things I quite like about this is that you've got great examples through the book, examples of how people have helped people, but you have a list. It's a curiosity list, and I think it just helps people. Like, sometimes people just need a little nudge. They just need to understand what are the kinds of things I could be curious about, or what are the kinds of things that I could learn when I get older. And I think providing those real examples make a real difference to people.
Yes, and sometimes people ask, who is the book for? Is it like for a certain age? I think the earlier you start, the better. And if you are at all interested in like, I'd like to age in a certain way, I think that's who the book would be for. And if you have aging parents, one idea is to start with yourself, right? We can think about first kind of putting on our air mask first of what is my aging experience like, because we're all on a path. And then it might be something that you would share with somebody else. You might say, hey, Mom, I read this book, Joyspan, and it really helped me think through some habits in my life, and maybe you'd like it too, right? So then you're not saying, oh, you need this. You're saying, it helped me. Maybe it would be helpful for you.
Yep. Tell me. don't show, or I should say, show me, don't tell me, right? That's the most powerful. I got it wrong there. Maybe that's a little Freudian slip on my part. So there's a bit too much telling happening. My last question for you, Kerry, and again, I appreciate your time today. You're being very generous in telling us what's happening. But I'm curious, what's changed for you in writing this book? Like how has writing this book changed you?
I think it's very humbling because what you realize is that no one has all the answers. No one is, quote, doing it right. And that we're not going to be able to change the narrative around older or around longevity by ourselves. So conversations like these, conversations between friends, we can, as a nation, in fact, as a world, make older better, but it's going to take every single one of us. So I hope that this conversation and these thoughts launch you to your own discovery to reimagine aging and know that we need you. Like if you're listening to this right now, we need you in the fight to change aging and in order to reduce suffering and to make older better.
Well, I hope so too. And I so appreciate the time you spent with us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Money Talk Podcast, brought to you by TD Wealth, recorded on October 16th, 2025. The information contained herein has been provided by TD Wealth and is for information purposes only. The information has been drawn from sources believed to be reliable. The information does not provide financial, legal, tax, or investment advice. Particular investment, tax, or trading strategies should be evaluated relative to each individual's objectives and risk tolerance. TD Wealth represents the products and services offered by TD Waterhouse Canada, TD Waterhouse Private Investment Council, TD Wealth Private Banking, offered by the Toronto Dominion Bank, and TD Wealth Private Trust, offered by the Canada Trust Company. All third-party products and services referred to or advertised in this presentation are sold by the company or organization named. While these products or services may serve as valuable aids to the independent investor, TD Direct Investing or TD Wealth does not specifically endorse any of the products or services. The third-party products and services referred to or advertised in this presentation are available as a convenience to its customers only, and TD Direct Investing or TD Wealth is not liable for any claims, losses, or damages however arising out of any purchase or use of third-party products or services. The TD logo and other TD trademarks are the property of the Toronto Dominion Bank or its subsidiaries.